I got all I want, and I got all I need, and I got everything. I got you and me. All I want, I got all I need.
Marriage is the best. Hello and welcome back to Marriage is the Best. Today we are going to be talking about conflict. Conflict in marriage. So sit back, buckle your seatbelts, but only if you're in the car. If you're not in the car, that would be weird. And let's take a trip down the conflict lane. To start out, I want to say that there are probably like 1,000 conflicts that every marriage is required to work through. You know, 1,000 hard conversations, 1,000 attempts to smooth over rough patches, or, you know, even to like sharpen each other if there's need for, you know, just engaging in that kind of a conversation. Becca sharpens me, you know, she smooths me out sometimes. And opening yourself to your partner, opening up your mind and your influence to your partner so that they can reflect yourself back to you, is one really important process in marriage. And if that's done really well, those reflections, the back and the forth, create more clarity and provide lots of room for growth. I've heard it said that conflict is simply an opportunity to grow. And I think that that's especially true in the marital context. Yeah, marital context. When you're able to see yourself more clearly, you're able to grow, develop, mature. You're able to essentially become a better version of yourself. And marriage is really good at highlighting and identifying those areas that we need to be growing in. 1,000 is more of a metaphor than an exact measurement. But I think that if we were to add up kind of the conflicts that we had in our first 4 years, it would probably add up to around that 1,000 mark. And well, as we moved through those conversations, as we engaged in 1,000 of them, it gave us an opportunity to grow together. And we allowed 1,000 conflicts in our marriage, knowing that it was necessary for growth and kind of normal or natural in all marriages. When I talk about conflict, I don't mean harmful, like big, explosive, angry, mad. You know, I don't mean violent. I don't mean ugly, fighting, nasty. I don't mean that. And depending on your context for growing up, depending on what you saw from your parents, depending on what you experience in your models for what conflict means, sometimes when you come into the marital context, your idea of conflict makes it more difficult for you to engage with your spouse in those kind of necessary conversations. So if I don't mean ugly, nasty, fighty violence, what do I mean, I guess? You know, that would be a good question. And really, what I mean by 1,000 conflicts is 1,000 opportunities or 1,000 discussions. You could even say it that way. 1,000 discussions, 1,000 touch points, 1,000 verbal engagements that are necessary to dig into, you know. So you don't have to get louder in order to have a conflict. You don't have to get demanding in order to have a conflict. You don't have to put other people down in order to have a conflict. And to some of us, that's obvious because maybe we grew up with models that wasn't involved in the conflict that we saw growing up. But for a lot of people, that all of those things or some of those things were involved in the conflicts that they were modeled. And when those people get married and have to face conflict, it can be really difficult to move through and be willing to engage in difficult conversations, because what that means to them and the model that they were given is really harmful conversations. In our second episode, we talk about the difference between harm and hurt and how it's inevitable that we're going to hurt each other. And Becca and I have definitely hurt each other throughout our different conversations, our 1,000 conflicts. Again, metaphorical. A bit metaphorical. Like, let's say 50-50. Let's say half metaphorical, half literal. So, conflict means bringing out your genuine, authentic self. It means showing your partner your opinions, your preferences, your differences, showing them who you are, showing them your personality, really allowing yourself to shine through in the relationship. And the reason that creates conflict is because none of us have all of our rough spots smoothed over, and none of us have our dull parts sharpened. None of us are perfect. And frankly, if you're a man, you might have some gross habits. I know I sure do. And that might create some conflict. Like, Peter, stop picking your nose. That's a conflict that we've had. And do we continue to have some of those gross conversations? Yeah. And we're 10 years in. And she has so patiently and loverly, moved with me through these conversations. So when you allow your true, yourself, just who you are, to shine through, that gives another person an opportunity to engage you. And in those engagements, in those connections and conversations, you are going to be given feedback. And that feedback is what we like to call conflict. I don't even really necessarily like the word conflict, but I think people get it. People understand what that means. So when you allow yourself to shine through and be true and authentic in the marital context, you are often met with an observation about that reality. Peter, you're picking your nose. That's really gross, and people don't like that, and that's not acceptable in polite society. I don't know why I don't know why I'm choosing this as like an example. I mean, it's not a great example, but it's gross, and it's partially true, unfortunately true, and it's definitely come up. So I guess this is me, bringing out my authentic version of me. And Becca has highlighted, different parts of me that needed to grow. So here's another example. Early on in our marriage, Peter struggled with some anger. We talked about in the first year, if you listen to the first year. In that first year, I was really wrestling internally with some of our dynamics, and we were kind of playing off each other in our really immature ways. And she showed me that I had an issue with anger. It wasn't her issue with anger. It wasn't anybody, right? Like, it was a true reflection of me. I was bringing that in. It was mine to own. And she was able to highlight that for me. And I had to take that on. I had to take that reality on. I had never in my wildest dreams thought of myself. I had never even considered myself to be an angry person. And if you've never considered yourself an angry person, maybe just get married and then have some kids and see if that changes things, changes your perspective on you. But it really did help me in the long run for my beautiful spouse to say, hey, this is an issue. And I don't even know if we formally, went into that, but throughout our conflict, that came out as an issue. And I knew it was a reflection of me. And so taking ownership and responsibility for that, I was able to grow. I was able to grow and mature because it was real and it was out there and it was raw and fresh. And, we looked at it together, and eventually I took responsibility for that and really had to do some internal work. It illuminated the work that I needed to do internally, and conflict often does that. So in that kind of vulnerable state of being, I was open to her challenge and correction, if you will. And that reflection, that challenge, and combined with the openness, allowed us to move through difficult conversations, difficult moments, over time, sharpening our dull spots and smoothing over our rough parts. And that was a rough part for me. When we talk about conflict, one thing that's really important to remember is that conflict needs to be expected in marriage. No marriage can survive without conflict. And conflict actually can grow and build and foster intimacy. When we know to expect conflict in our marriages, you enter into those conversations a little differently, right? You're able to prepare yourself. You're able to think that this is kind of a normal process. When we are not thinking that this is kind of an inevitable, healthy even part of the process, then I think that conflict can make us feel really ashamed. It can make us look really judgmentally on ourselves, on our spouses, on our marriages. And that creates a barrier for the growth that conflict is supposed to bring into our marriages. Those conflicts are, again, that opportunity for reflection and growth and sharpening and all of those things. So knowing that in our marriages, we're going to experience conflict, that it's normal, that it's okay, is a healthy part of moving through your marriage over time, or even preparing yourself as a single person for marriage, knowing that conflict is going to occur. So, whether you marry a Sarah or a Becca or an Amy or a Lauren or anyone else, you are going to face conflict no matter what. And when you train yourself to see conflict as a necessary part of your marriage, you will benefit way more from its impact and its transformative power. Like I said before, I can't remember who said it. I should have looked it up, but all conflict is an opportunity for growth. Not only do all marriages have conflict, not only, regardless of who you marry, you will find conflict, but every marriage has issues that are unsolvable or unresolvable. Basically means there isn't a clear-cut solution or resolution that you can land on. The Gottmans from the Gottman Institute, the Gottmans that wrote 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work, and have tons of resources out there for couples, they found in their love, I can't remember what they called it, where they came in. They invited couples into their scientific love factory. That sounds weird. Anyways, the Gottmans had couples in, lots of them, thousands of couples come in and talk through things. And what they found was that around 70% of all marital conflict does not resolve over time. I'm going to say that again for emphasis, because that's crazy if you think about that. The Gottmans found that around 70% of all marital conflict does not resolve itself over time. So if you didn't believe me at the start, if you were like, are you sure that conflict is, a thing? And are you sure that that's the case? Yes, we are. Because marriage is a known entity. It is something that has been studied. It is something that can be known. It is something that can be predictable. marital satisfaction, divorce. It's very predictable, because when you know what you're looking for, you know what a marriage can sustain. And you know what a marriage looks like that is broken and is not going to end in satisfaction or a success. Just to kind of emphasize that, the Gottmans in their love lab, there we go, the love lab, the Gottmans in their love lab were able to predict marital success, what would happen in a marriage, either happily married, unhappily married, or divorced, at a 96%. 96%. That's how successful they were at predicting those things. When we look at marriage and study marriage, we can know what makes it work. We can know what makes it doesn't work. And conflict is something that, if done well, can make your marriage way better. And there's a necessary amount of it. And there's processes that can be learned and worked on that can make conflict healthier and more transformative, and can really strengthen the foundation of the marriage over time. These unresolvable conflicts, sometimes they come from personality differences, sometimes they come from value expression or discrepancy, sometimes they come from family of origin issues, sometimes they come from like the masculine part of the marriage versus the feminine part of the marriage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They can come from all sorts of different places. And again, 70% of all marital conflict cannot or does not resolve itself over time. The Gottmans found that successful couples found a way to update the way they talk about unresolvable issues, not resolve them. So again, this is where the expectations part of it is really important. So if you're coming into your marriage with the expectations that you're not going to have conflict, or the conflict that you have is going to be resolved or easily taken care of and like moved beyond or past, you are setting yourself up with this expectation that it's mismatched with the reality. You're not quite understanding or engaging the reality of your marriage if you're coming in with that expectation, or if you're avoiding the conflicts, the necessary conversations that really need to be had. Again, it's going to most likely lead to difficulties in that growing, reflecting, clarifying process. The Gottmans found that successful couples updated the way that they talk about unresolvable issues. Disastrous couples, so couples that would fail over time, either in divorce or just unhappily married, took the approach of fighting to win. And successful couples over time took the strategy of fighting to understand. So let's talk a little bit about fighting to win versus fighting to understand. So if you imagine that you're sitting across from your partner and there is a glass in front of you, okay? And this glass has, half full of water. And so couples that want to win, they see their partner through the glass. Their partner is the issue, and their view is obviously skewed. It's wrong. It's being changed essentially by the water or the glass. And so they're taking that glass and they're putting it right up into their face. It's this, it's a big glass, obviously. And they're seeing their partner through the glass, and it's distorted. That's the word I was kind of looking for before. It's a distorted view, and they're seeing their partner as the enemy, essentially, as the person that they're competing against. And they're fighting their partner instead of acknowledging the problem, which is this glass thing. And so if we move the glass thing, right, away from their view, and we took it down, and then we set it aside. So if your partner is right in front of you in this view, and the glass is on the table, an arm's length away, and now what happens is you can see your partner clearly. Okay. You can acknowledge them clearly, but also you can see the glass. You can see the problem. You can see this conflict thing. And when couples are able to not equate their partner with the conflict or the problem, and not treat their partner like they're the enemy, or they're only seeing the partner through the conflict, then they're able to see both, and they're able to allow the conflict to be discussed and engaged without fighting their partner. The other side of that, the successful couples, is that successful couples engage in conflict in order to understand. So not to win, but to understand. Let me give you a quick example in our marriage. Becca struggles with some anxiety, which has led us to have lots of discussions surrounding movies and television shows and, YouTube and Twitter and other things, right? And I won't go into too many details on that, but Becca just has struggled with some anxiety surrounding, media, social media, movies, and things of that nature. So when there would be a conversation that needed to happen that she was feeling anxious about, early on, those conversations would get heated. They would take up my view of my spouse, and I would get really defensive. I saw her anxiety as like a personal attack, like my character was coming into question, and I was being questioned about my value or my values, and it would get heated, and I would want to win. I would want to show her that the anxiety was wrong, that she was wrong, that her feelings were bad in this moment, and that if only I could just get her to see, again, like picking up this glass and looking at her right through it. I was just trying to get her to see it clearly. And, she's not going to see it clearly. The glass and the water and the conflict and the position really is the problem. The position that I was putting this conflict in made it impossible for me to see her clearly. And it made my goal, instead of understanding where she was coming from, it made my goal to force her to see something different. And if only I could make her see something different, see me different, see my character different, see the goings on, the details, change and update the way that she was seeing those things, then we would win, and our conflict would be better. And it didn't work. It didn't work at all. Becca would get hurt or offended, or, we would just have a really hard time seeing each other in those moments. However, when I choose to fight to try and see, if I took that glass right away from my vision and I put it to the side, I started to understand that really what she was showing me was her vulnerabilities. She was showing me fear or hurt. She might be showing me something in her past, a history thing or a trauma thing. She might be showing me any number of internal realities, that she was bringing out in a very authentic way. And she needed me to acknowledge the vulnerabilities, and I couldn't do that because my lens was all full of defensiveness and hurt, and what I felt like was her calling my character into question. And all of those things got in the way of me seeing the conflict clearly and positioning it correctly. When I stopped trying, eventually, after many, 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 many rounds of doing it poorly and having to grow slowly over time through trial and error, getting really defensive, talking about it over and over and over again, and eventually trying to understand where she was coming from, and trying to understand myself and the responses that I was giving, trying to understand where my defensiveness was coming from, trying to connect with the information that she was sharing versus reject, her premises and where she was coming from. It was a really, really hard process, like an exceptionally difficult process. And it took us 1,000 conflicts. It really did. It took us 1,000 conversations in order to get to a place where we understood one another. There was so many opportunities for conflict. There were so many conversations that we moved through together. And because we were diligent in working through those things, we came to the table with the assumption that there was no conflict that would ever break us apart. And so the only other option is to engage in it and work through it. And because we were open to that reality, and we were dating and attempting to stay connected through those first 4 years, we were able to set a foundation of knowledge and understanding of each other over the course of 1,000 conflicts. And after that, we'd still had conflict, but we were able to kind of move beyond that initial stage of development in our marriage into a much more peaceful place, a place of more understanding, a place where it felt more like we were porting. When we connected and we talked about things, we were porting in a storm. We were coming alongside one another and linking our ships together, and we were more stable together because we had more surface area on the water. I think that's probably what stabilizes ships if they were to tie themselves together. Anyways, so we were able to do that because we did the work. And the work is 1,000 conflicts. That's what it takes. It takes about 1,000 conflicts, 1,000 conversations to move through. And some of those are really, really hard, and some of them were easier. Some of them were really, really, we were exhausted and stressed and overwhelmed and, angry, and some of them had raised voices, and some of them had, some of them we walked away really hurt, and some of them we were just completely exacerbated by, and some of them took 10 minutes to overcome and to get back and repair our relationship thereafter. And some of them, it took a day in order to come back to that conversation and work through a difficult moment. But because of our commitment to 1,000 conflicts, in hindsight, obviously we weren't counting them or thinking like this when we were doing it. But the principle there was that we were committed to doing that, and we were committed to staying connected through that. So our conflict looks different now than it did during the first 4 years that season. It looks different now even than the 4 years thereafter, from years 5 through 8. And we still have conversations. We still have, a lot of them are really polite. A lot of them we're coming from such a different place. We're coming from a place of understanding on a level that allows us to connect with the information that's just really natural. And our repairs have become seamless in some senses. I think earlier today, actually, 15 minutes. Yeah, I was sitting here talking 15 minutes ago, but 45 minutes ago, probably closer to an hour, about an hour ago, we had a conflict. I was done with my bedtime, connections. So I had spent, a little bit of time with each of the kids, came downstairs. I was able to decompress. I was getting really stoked and pumped for the podcast tonight. And she comes down fresh, like super fresh from saying goodnight. And she has been doing an amazing job of engaging with our kids at night, at bedtime. Like an incredible job. She's paying really focused attention. She is engaging in conversation. She's really deeply connecting with these beautiful people that we've been blessed with. And she gets downstairs, and I immediately say, all right, so if we do our episode right now, then maybe we'll get to watch a movie together later. Now, I know now that that was the wrong thing to say to a tired mom who had just spent, essentially 16 hours pouring out in the morning, getting people ready for church, pouring out at church, pouring out in the ride home, pouring out, getting ready for the party, having the party, hosting and making food and seeing people and, doing all of the things that are required of a beautiful wife woman. And so in that moment, she looks at me like, are you missing some things in your mind, in your brain? And, she kind of shortly is like, there's no way that that's going to happen. And no, and I just finished. And what are you doing? And why are you saying that? And like, what do you mean? And I immediately realized what I've done. Whereas in the past, I would have highlighted her response. I would have taken that glass, right, that we were talking about. I would have put it right up to my face and I would have been offended. I would have gone in defense mode. I would have said, like, what gives you, like, I was just asking to connect with you. This was about connection, and you're saying you don't even want to connect. Right? I would have made it about all of the things that didn't need to come into play, because I wouldn't have seen her. I would have seen the offense, the perceived offense, and I would have made all these claims, and I would have felt really, honestly, right. I would have felt self-righteous. I would have felt totally in the right, because from my perspective, I got to be offended, and I could have grabbed hold of that and the adrenaline that comes with it, and I could have just ran and sprinted with it as far as I could. And that would have ruined the next hour and potentially more time, depending on how long I wanted to hold on to that sense of self-righteousness. So I immediately realized what I did. And I turned to her and I expressed an understanding. I expressed how I messed up. I had been able to decompress and you have not. You have had a crazy day. Podcasting is not your ideal for decompressing and enjoying the rest of our evening together. You are an amazing person. I'm so appreciative and grateful for how you connect with our girls and walk through the evening times, and so we were able to capture that moment and really make it a moment of connection and understanding, as opposed to a moment of offensiveness, defensiveness, disconnect, those kinds of things. And that happened about, an hour and a bit ago. It's because of 1,000 conflicts that we were able to engage, offend, repair, all in the matter of a couple of minutes. It's because we know each other on a really deep level and understand and appreciate one another on that deep level that we're able to take these moments of difficulty, and we have a lot of them. We're not people who move through life without stress. We're not people who move through life without conflict. Obviously, we engage in difficult conversations very, very regularly, even up to today, because of the season that we spent really working through the conflicts, the difficult conversations, saying the things that we were feeling, engaging with each other, and attempting to stay connected. We built out a foundation, a really beautiful foundation of knowledge and understanding that then keeps us connected even when I say or do something stupid, which happens quite often, or, she does something that maybe I I'm a little bit hurt by, and we're able to move through those moments and stay connected and repair them quite quickly. And I believe that it takes approximately 1,000 conflicts in order to get to a point where that's possible. And I believe that it's possible for you to move through your own set of issues and struggles, your unresolvables, to update how you're talking about, the unresolvables, and to get to a place where you are feeling so known and understood and appreciated that you move through difficult conversations and you're able to receive that hurt, reconnect, repair that, and continue to grow and build your intimacy. So there's a few things about unresolvable conflict that we need to kind of wrap up. So using humor is really important in the context of your unresolvable issues because it cuts the tension away from like highlighting the conflict, and it makes it a little bit lighter, a little bit easier to stay connected, even though there is this unresolvable issue that you're looking at again, right? For the whatever amount of time, for the X amount of time. Over time, we have grown in our understanding and connection, and she actually has become more gentle in expressing her vulnerabilities and engaging me in that. And I have become less defensive in responding to some of the things that she's bringing up. The Gottmans call this softened startup, which is, the first 3 minutes of a conversation, the first 3 minutes of a conflict decide and determine the outcome. And so how the conflict starts, how usually the wife brings up that conflict is determinative. It can be determinative in how they are able to move through that. And then, so if the wife's role is to softly start those conversations and engage their husband in that way, the husband's role is to manage their defensiveness. So couples that are successful over time, the husband is managing their defensiveness well and not becoming offended, but seeking to understand and connect with the information and the vulnerabilities that are being shared. And the wife is gently and softly starting up those conversations. They have a really great YouTube video. It's a TED Talk that I'm going to link in the bio that you could go look at. They go through a lot. It's like 17 minutes. It's not too long. And if you wanted to invest just those 17 minutes, they go through a lot of their data, a lot of basically their whole book, essentially, but just, synthesized down into a 17-minute little TED Talk. It's really good. And they go through some examples, and I think that would be valuable. So if you want to check that out, their book is really great. And we have that link in the bio too, the 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. That's a whole thing. So check that out if you would like. But they talk about the softened startup a little bit in their 17 minutes. And then the defensiveness is more in the book and less in the TED Talk. So, and then, the humor is really important. We use humor to just cut the tension and to create connection even in the midst of the conflict. And that's especially important because we're talking about some of these conflicts being unresolvable, almost 70% of them. So in order to dialogue, in order to engage in conversations over time about the conflict, you really need to have some lightness and the ability to laugh and the ability to continue moving through those conversations and staying connected. So that's where humor can come into play. All right. So let's kind of wrap up here. 1,000 conflicts is a single idea. That's why it is necessary. Not 1,000 conflicts are necessary. 1,000 conflicts, the idea, single idea, is necessary in order for couples to move through the lifespan of a marriage and stay connected. Conflict is normal. It's an expectation of all marriages, and conflict gives you an opportunity for growth and development. Conflict does not mean harming you one another, and it doesn't mean huge blow-up fights, explosiveness. When we set our expectations correctly around conflict, it grows our ability to engage in it and to have it yield positive fruit in our lives. 70% of all marital conflict does not resolve itself over time. And so the goal becomes to develop a dialogue and to engage gently and with very limited defensiveness across time so that you can sustain that 1,000 conflicts idea, so that you can move through, right, and have 1,000. Because if it's explosive and it's crazy and it's harmful every time, you're not gonna make it through. Conflict can connect, and conflict is necessary in order to move through the first stage of marital development. So that's the wrap up. If you have any questions, shoot us over a message. We had an interesting comment on our Facebook page, the Marriage is the Best Facebook page, and it was regarding conflict and the role of being an eldest versus being a middle versus being a youngest. And the writer had pointed out that we're both middle children, and so being middle children, our personalities are a little bit more relaxed, and that kind of changes the way that we engage in conflict versus kind of an oldest to a youngest, or a youngest to an oldest, or, an oldest to an oldest, where there's, headstrong in leadership and, all of those things. So birth order actually can change the dynamic of conflict in a marriage, which I thought was a great point and kind of an interesting thing to think about. If you want to join that group, Marriage is the Best podcast, it's on Facebook. We would love to have you. We release polls every Wednesday, and that's kind of fun just to kind of gather some data and some information on the people who are listening to the podcast. Shoot us an email if you have any comments or thoughts or questions. We have a voicemail that you can leave. That would be great. If you would ever want to be on the show, feel free to write us and let us know. And we hope that you're enjoying it. We hope that this is helpful, that it's encouraging, that your relationship is becoming more and more and more a priority for you, and that it's becoming the best thing in your life. And so thanks so much for listening. Bye, everybody.